Hello, welcome back. This video is going to look at how British actions inspired the American Revolution. So, building up to the Revolutionary War, people in the colonies didn't just say, you know what, we're done with Great Britain, we want to fight a war. That's not how it happened. Lots of different causes led to that eventual war. So the first thing, of course, was the French and Indian War that was fought 1754 to 1763. Now, this war, even though it sounds different, the French and the Indians were actually fighting with each other against the British and the colonists. So the England and the colonies were actually fighting as a united front against the French and the Indians. This was fought primarily over land in Pennsylvania and Ohio. It's kind of difficult for us to think about that land, those states, being unincorporated or not being states or being Indian territory, but that's what it was during this time period. So the British were able to send over British troops to help protect the colonists from the French and the Indian advances. And one thing that we know about fighting wars is that it costs a lot of money. This war was no different. So in order to kind of increase or rebuild the treasury, the British treasury, Parliament decided, you know what, we're going to place some additional taxes on the colonies. And Great Britain really didn't see that as an issue, because in their mind, the colonies were still very much politically and economically connected to Great Britain. So they saw that as just an extension of Great Britain. The colonies, on the other hand, were used to something known as salutary neglect, and you need to have that in your notes, okay? The colonists were used to being governed by salutary neglect, and that's S-A-L-U-T-A-R-Y, neglect, okay? And salutary neglect means that Great Britain would pretty much allow the colonists to do whatever they want politically, like with their government, but then would expect them to be kind of like their cash cow. So the Great Britain made money off of the colonies, basically, okay? So the colonies kind of started to see this as Great Britain taking more control over the inner workings of their lives, and they didn't like it. So the first of these taxes that we want to look at is the Sugar Act. And the Sugar Act was passed in 1764. And as you can imagine, it dealt with a tax on sugar. But it wasn't just sugar. It was things like molasses and rum, anything that had like sugar as an ingredient. People in the colonies would have had to pay an increased tax on. The Stamp Act in 1765. This was passed, and it never really actually took effect because the result of it was so bad. The Stamp Act required the colonies to pay for like stamped paper, okay? So if you think about your birth certificate, that embossed seal that's on your birth certificate, that's like the stamp that would have to be put on this paper. And you would have to use this paper for marriage licenses, birth certificates, death certificates, newspapers, anything that was going to be printed was going to have to be printed on this paper. And to buy this paper was going to cost a little bit of money, okay? So the Stamp Act in 1765 was not very well received. And the Tea Act of 1773. Now, this is probably the act that you've heard the most about. But it's important to remember a couple things. The Tea Act of 1773 did not put an increased tax on tea, okay? It actually made the British tea cheaper, all right? And we'll go into all of that detail in another class. But the Tea Act of 1773 was created to try to get the colonies to purchase British tea as opposed to Dutch tea. Okay, so the colonists didn't like that. They didn't want to be told what kind of tea they should be drinking, all right? So then, of course, we know that leads to the Boston Tea Party, where the colonists dressed up as Mohawk Indians and dumped the tea overboard into Boston Harbor. And if you're Great Britain, you're looking at that and you're like, okay, you just destroyed government property. That's not good, okay? So Great Britain kind of sees that the colonies are starting to rebel a little bit. And just like if your parents see that you're starting to rebel a little bit, they're probably going to increase some control. They're going to tighten your curfew. Maybe they're going to not allow you to drive your car. You're going to see some repercussions from that behavior. And that's exactly what the Intolerable Acts were. These were a group of acts that were designed to clamp down control on the British colonies. So If you're the colonists and you're used to pretty much doing your own thing, you're going to look at that and say, hey, that's not okay. We don't like that. So eventually you're going to take action, and that's how we see this revolutionary mindset building. Excuse me. All right, so as early as the 1750s, there's even some mumbles of independence. Like maybe the colonies can kind of get together and do their own thing. Maybe we don't need Great Britain. Benjamin Franklin, a guy you may have heard of before, he devises this document, this plan, known as the Albany Plan of Union, okay? And it's shared with delegates at the Albany Congress. And basically what it was going to do was to allow each state, or each colony, I'm sorry, to send a representative to this national or this continental association that would be responsible for making laws and decisions, etc. But the colonies rejected that because they thought it was way too much like Parliament, and they didn't want one group like that to have so much power. So they said, nope, don't think so. Okay? With that, I'm going to stop for this video. If you have any questions, let me know.